The Life of Jane Austen, 5 minutes. Jane Austen only wrote 5 major novels, but she is still one of the most important novelists, with her books being adapted into numerous films, not only using the actual plots, but adapting them into Bollywood styles in Bride and Prejudice, teen comedies like Clueless, or even horror such as Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. But we don't know that much about the real Jane Austen. She was born on December 16, 1776, in Steventon, a small town in England where her father was the rector. She was the 7th of 8 children, and her father was the rector or pastor of 2 small parishes, which barely provided enough for his large family, so he supplemented his income with tutoring. Austen was a part of the gentry, but not the aristocracy. Her father was from an old family, but his part of the family was not wealthy. Her mother was Cassandra Lee, who was also from an important family. Jane Austen lived with her family for the first few months and then was probably sent to live with a family in the village until she was 1 or 2 years old. This wasn't uncommon at the time. At that point, when she was a bit easier to handle, she would have gone back to live with her family. Steventon, where she grew up, is the ideal country parish home with its garden and large grounds, even if the house itself was just a cottage. Her sister Cassandra, she was 3 years older, but the two were practically inseparable throughout their lives. They moved to Oxford together to attend a small boarding school in 1782, but then the school itself moved to Southampton the next year. An illness struck Southampton, however, and both Cassandra and Jane became ill. The headmistress of the school didn't even inform their parents about the illness, but their cousin, Jane Cooper, who also attended the school, she wrote to her parents, and they all came to get their children immediately. Only Jane Austen became seriously ill, although Jane Cooper's mother died from that same illness after she got it from her daughter. From 1785 to 1787, both children attended another school, but then they returned home. In total, they had about 2 years of schooling. Their father's household, filled with their brothers and other students, was an ideal place to learn, however, and Jane had a full run of her father's library. Jane Austen began writing for her family at a young age, and much of her early work, called Juvenilia, is available today. In 1787, 3 more family members came to stay with the Austens, and they had a major impact on Jane. Philadelphia was George Austen's sister, Jane's aunt, who had gone to India to find a husband. She married Tyso Hancock, who was friends with Warren Hastings, who would later become the governor of India. Hastings, the person who became governor, was the godfather to Philadelphia's daughter Eliza. When Philadelphia's husband died, Hastings gave a large fortune to both the widow and the daughter Eliza. Eliza moved in with the Austens along with Philadelphia, and Eliza's son Hastings, who was named after that famous Warren Hastings mentioned earlier. Eliza had grown up in India, but she had married a French aristocrat. She spent time in the French court before the French Revolution forced her to flee. Her husband, a count, was eventually executed for bribing witnesses to help a friend. Although neither Jane Austen nor her sister Cassandra ever married, she may have had 2 different love interests. The first was Tom Lefroy from Ireland, who developed a serious relationship with Jane, but he couldn't afford to marry, so he returned home to Ireland. Everything suggests that he was her great love. In 1802, Harris Bigwither did, in fact, propose to Jane Austen, and she initially accepted. The next morning, however, she withdrew her acceptance, and the two were not married. In 1802, Austen's father retired, and the family moved to the bustling resort town of Bath. In 1803, she sold her first novel, which would become Northanger Abbey, but it was not published until after her death. In 1805, her father died. At this point, it was just her mother, Cassandra, and herself, and they couldn't afford to stay in Bath, so they eventually moved into Chawton College, which was owned by Jane's brother Edward from his inheritance from his adopted family. Sense and Sensibility was finally published in 1811, anonymously, because Jane didn't want any publicity. It was a success and was followed by Pride and Prejudice in 1813. Mansfield Park followed in 1814. The Prince Regent admired Pride and Prejudice, and he found out who she was. So he had his official librarian correspond with Jane Austen about dedicating her next book to him. It was a conundrum, however, because Jane didn't approve of the Prince Regent's immoral lifestyle, but she couldn't refuse a royal decree. So she dedicated Emma to the Prince Regent. To His Royal Highness, the Prince Regent. This work is, by His Royal Highness's permission, most respectfully dedicated by His Royal Highness's dutiful and obedient humble servant, the author. It served the purpose, dedication, humility, fulfilling her duty, but without actually saying anything in praise. Jane Austen became ill sometime in 1816, and she died on the 18th of July, 1817, in the arms of her sister, Cassandra. She was buried in Winchester Cathedral along with Shakespeare, Wordsworth, and other famous writers. Yet her grave marker makes no mention of her as a writer, only that she was a great sister and friend. After her death, her siblings saw to the publication of Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. She also left an unfinished novel, Sanditon, which was finally published in 1925. And that's the life of Jane Austen in 5 minutes.